Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Be kind to your kids, they choose your nursing home. It's this sentiment that best sums up some new ideas being touted today, aimed at bridging Britain's yawning intergenerational wealth gap. As millennials struggle with high housing costs, less job security and lower pay, while older people often hang on to substantial sums of accumulated wealth. So, is it time for a grand redistribution, including a £10,000 grant to help buy a home? Our political editor Gary Gibbon reports.
Metroland, shrine to the home-owning dream. Many of the parents and grandparents of today's 20-somethings could hope to buy in places like Watford. But today's under-30s are struggling with stagnant wages, sky-high property prices, and wonder where it will end.
It's probably the core worry of people in my age group. I'm 30 next month, so if most people, if they're likely to be able to buy a house, probably have already done so, and it's usually through help from parents. It's the kind of topic, I think, that's on the minds of most of the people my age.
Do you think the younger generation have got it a bit harder?
I don't know what happened, but it's a lot harder for them. I don't think they've got much future.
But I think like back in the day, I think it was quite easier to get a house.
For your parents' generation?
Yeah, to be honest. Yeah.
It's going to be tougher for you?
Yeah, to be honest, yeah, I think.
Do you feel pessimistic about being as well off as your parents when you're their age?
Yeah, it's going to be harder to get a job, a house.
The average property price around here is now £500,000, a 10% deposit, way above a young household's entire annual disposable income. What age do you think you'll end up owning a property? Rather than renting?
I'll probably say by the time I'm 40 maybe.
What age do you think you'll be when you own a house?
30, 40.
Yeah, I'm middle-aged, if I will, yeah.
The Resolution Foundation says the wealth locked up in properties like these needs to be taxed more, and the proceeds spread around to stop the burden of taxes for NHS, care and other growing demands falling on the younger, struggling workforce. Here's what wealth tax has been putting into the exchequer as a percentage of GDP over the last 50 years. You can see that inheritance tax and council tax are doing most of the work. The little strips are stamp duty and capital gains tax. Not much has changed in half a century, except for a dip just after the end of the poll tax. Now, look at increasing wealth held around the country. An extraordinarily different story. And most of that is held by the property-owning older generations. Resolution Foundation suggests that wealth needs to be tapped into more by the state to avoid younger, struggling generations being overburdened by taxation. They want inheritance tax done away with, and any inherited money over £125,000 would be subject to 20% tax. Over £500,000, 30%.
I think where tax is concerned, we all resent it. Let's be honest, whatever the tax is, we're going to resent it. But I do think the structure has to change. It has to change.
And the Resolution Foundation has a few more changes in mind, replacing the council tax with a property tax annual levy, just below 1% of house value, even more for some houses in areas like Watford. They also want national insurance levied on pensioners' employment income and on some private occupational pension income. Many Tory MPs said their core demographic of older voters would never forgive such an assault on their wealth.
When I was young, got married in the 70s, no, you had to save up for things then. You had second-hand stuff and everything, and you saved for new. And, you know, so I can't see that there's that much difference between it. It's just slightly different, that's all.
The Resolution Foundation found that 20-somethings commute further than previous generations, live in smaller spaces and spend on average 15% less. The foundation worries that if heavier income tax was piled on top of everything else, anger could grow and detachment from the political system.
Well, joining me now is Conservative MP Neil O'Brien from Westminster, and here in the studio, Torsten Bell, the director of the Resolution Foundation. Among other career highlights, they were in charge of policy, respectively, for George Osborne and Ed Miliband prior to the 2015 elections. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Torsten Bell, first of all, this idea of giving £10,000 to all 25-year-olds. Why would you do that? Some 25-year-olds have got wealthy parents.
Well, the bigger picture here is, if we step back and think about what is the state of 21st century Britain, different generations are facing different challenges, but all of them need a politics that steps back and helps tackle those challenges. So for the old today, they're worried that the NHS and the social care system they rely on won't be there when they need it in old age. And the young are finding it harder to build up assets, to earn more than their predecessors, and to get on the housing ladder. And we think that is not a great situation for Britain to be in. So we need a whole sweep of policy changes to address that. But one of those is action like this £10,000 payment to make sure that the young know Britain's got something to offer them.
OK, let's bring in Neil O'Brien. You were nodding there. Do you think the state is the answer?
Well, I'm positive about some of the things in this report, like the attempt to increase home ownership among young people. I agree with that. But I'm pretty sceptical about the idea that we can increase tax on pensioners, we can increase inheritance tax, and we can also increase council tax at the same time. That is just too many tax increases. And if we have more money to spend, the priority should be the NHS, rather than a giveaway of £10,000 even to the children of millionaires. It's just not a sensible use of resources, and I don't think it will ever happen. There are some really positive things happening for younger people in this country. Youth unemployment is half what it was just 5 years ago.
Can I just interrupt you, Neil O'Brien? Sorry, because we are limited on time. Isn't the problem that your party doesn't really care about 25-year-olds because young people don't vote Conservative?
But that's just not true. I care a lot about younger people. I want to see them get a home of their own. That's one of the reasons why we're increasing the minimum wage and the national living wage. So it won't be one of the highest minimum wages in the entire world. It's one reason we've cut tax for people on lower incomes. It's so we can put more money in people's pockets, including younger people. And it's the reason why we're doing a range of things to increase educational opportunities, and we've taken the cap off the number of people going to university.
Your response to that? All these things the government is doing for young people?
Well, I actually think there is a bit of a consensus building across the political divide, and actually across generations, that something needs to be done. Nobody wants a country that feels divided, with young people thinking that it doesn't work for them and old people thinking, am I going to get the care I need? So I think that's a very good thing. I think the question for politicians on all parties is to step back and say, have they really got answers big enough to the scale of the challenges? In the next 2 decades, inheritances are going to double in Britain, but young people won't get those on average until they get to 61. And obviously, lots of young people won't receive those inheritances at all. Are we happy about a country where more of the living standards over our lifetimes are based on who our parents are than what we earn? And that is what we're heading to without some action.
You want to shift things for 25-year-olds. What about 26 and 27-year-olds? Nothing for them. They can stay screwed, can they?
No, the policy sets out a transition phase, so people actually into their early 30s would be the immediate beneficiaries, not at all.
Neil O'Brien, do you think this is viable for your party to take up at all?
I don't think it is viable. I think the idea that nobody in this country will be able to pass on the family home to their children is just not something that anybody wants. It's never going to fly politically. But just to be a bit more positive, I think one thing that I really like in this report is a proposal that we should capture, when we do build housing, more of the gains of that development for the community. I think that's an excellent idea, and we should be applying that money we could raise from that into helping younger people to get on the housing ladder. So there's pros and cons in this report.
Torsten Bell, the Conservative Party manifesto last year tried to address the generational inequality by tackling social care. Then it was very quick, the so-called dementia tax was very quickly dropped. The Conservative Party rejected this plan. Why would any other party adopt it?
Well, I mean, there's lots of problems with the Conservative Party manifesto proposal last year, but look, the social care debate is a really good example. We have known we have a disaster in England, not in Great Britain, in England, on social care for a long time, at least 15 years. Politicians of all parties have said they're going to solve it. Theresa May said it was the issue she was going to solve last year, and we have let down old people again and again and again. And that is because the debate gets stuck in do we do it all via public funding, or do we make individuals pay more? And the truth is, we're going to have to do both, but we need to do it in a much more sensible way. Yes, some extra cash from the state, funded, we say, by a reform of council tax for a fairer local taxation system, but asking people only those with significant assets to contribute something, but unlike the Conservative manifesto last year, with much tighter limits on what they have to contribute, so you can't lose your house just because you happen to be unlucky enough to get dementia.
OK. Neil O'Brien, what's your offer to 25-year-olds? He wants to give them £10,000. What have you got? Not even a free bus pass?
In reality, nobody is going to get £10,000. I'm afraid it's pie in the sky economics, and if we've got money, economy, we've got to prioritise investing in the NHS. That's got to be the #1 priority, rather than freebies and giveaways that just aren't going to happen, frankly. So I do want to see further action to help younger people get on the housing ladder. I think it was really welcome that we just cut stamp duty, and tens of thousands of people are benefiting from that when they buy their first home. And things like Help to Buy have helped an incredible number of people, including my constituency, to get on the housing ladder. So we are trying to address these big challenges. It's not simple, but the answer is not massive new taxes on pensioners, massive increases in council tax, and a totally unworkable idea on inheritance tax that is simply unfair and just feels inhuman.
Thanks very much. Neil O'Brien, Torsten Bell, thanks for joining us. No one's getting any freebies tonight.
Now, with today's 30-somethings earning less than their parents and many unable to afford to buy a home, the generational divide is becoming one of the big issues of our time. Researchers are suggesting bridging that economic gap by giving every 25-year-old £10,000. This so-called citizens' inheritance is just one of a number of proposals from the Resolution Foundation. Our economics editor, Ed Conway, reports.
Economics is all about taking a bird's-eye view of the country. And from up here, it's pretty clear what our main problems are. The wealth gap between young and old, a creaking NHS and an underfunded social care system. Perhaps that's why the Resolution Foundation chose to hold their big event on intergenerational inequality in a City of London skyscraper. No jokes about ivory towers, please.
The world is changing because we've been through 2 or 3 decades when we had a large number of people at working age in work and relatively few dependents, relatively few kids and older people. Now that big generation of baby boomers are getting older, that's going to push up spending on healthcare, push up spending on social care.
Down at ground level in Cambridge, one pensioner is taking matters into his own hands. When John's son was struggling to find a decent job, he created one for him by starting up this cafe.
I had a very privileged path through life. People in more ordinary jobs that worked in shops or garages, you would be able to afford to live and your aspiration was to have your own home. And now that's become unaffordable.
Now consider things from the perspective of Ned, who works in the cafe. Like most millennials, he's finding it harder to make a living than his parents' generation.
I've got my little room and I pay for that, and I, try and save up money, but I mean, obviously I'm going in and out of my overdraft, so how am I ever going to save up money for a deposit on a house?
So what to do? Well, one of the Foundation's proposals is for pensioners to pay national insurance contributions to fund a £2.3 billion NHS levy. Another is that government should provide a citizen's inheritance, a £10,000 payment for all 25-year-olds, funded by an overhauled inheritance tax. This is all controversial stuff, which brings us to the £64 billion question. Will voters or businesses actually support it?
The bold ideas are worth looking at. We need to look at them and to consider them. Obviously, as business, we will have points of view. We don't want unintended consequences that make it harder to make our economy move forward, particularly in Brexit. But this is a very, very important start.
So why do we need this revolution in economic policy? Well, the Resolution Foundation says there's oodles of evidence that millennials aren't doing as well as previous generations. They've got 78 charts. We've picked out the top 3, starting with this. They are earning less than the generation before. Look at that purple line, not going up as fast in terms of earnings. Home ownership rates, they've plummeted for millennials too, compared with Generation X or indeed the baby boomers. And consider this. The wealth generated in the UK economy has gone up and up and up and up in previous decades, but the amount that we tax it just hasn't kept track.
But even amid the sunshine today, there's still a dark cloud hanging over this issue. As last year's elections showed, you can propose plenty of new taxes to bridge the generations, just don't expect people to vote for them. Ed Conway, Sky News.
So, is it a headline-grabbing gimmick or is it a game-changing policy? I'm joined by Tom Selby, who's a senior analyst at the online investment provider AJ Bell. Welcome to you. So, which is it in your view? Is there some serious policy here?
So, I think what we've seen from the Resolution Foundation is the beginning of a serious national debate on the issue of intergenerational fairness. So, the idea that the younger generation coming through, sometimes labelled as millennials, aren't going to do as well as the older generation. So previously it's been accepted that as you go through the generations, each generation does a bit better from the pension system, through earnings, from the housing ladder, things like that. that deal potentially is being broken, and so what they're trying to push forward are some radical ideas. Now, whether those ideas will be taken up by politicians who have to think about winning general elections is another thing entirely. But I think the aim here is to try and start a debate around what is quite an important issue.
And where's the money coming from?
Good question. So in terms of the £10,000, the Resolution Foundation has recommended that inheritance tax, so the amount that you can pass on tax-free to different generations, is lowered, and then they expect to use some of that money in order to pay for this payment, this bung, in effect, to people over the age of 25.
And there isn't any suggestion that it would be means tested, is there? Because obviously some people come from wealthier families.
Exactly. So we've got two different issues of fairness here. So intergenerational, so between older people and younger people. But as you say, if you pass on £10,000 to each individual person, some people will be rich, some people will be poor. And I think there will be some difficulties in explaining to people why somebody who's earning not very much, perhaps somebody who's on means-tested benefits already, gets £10,000, and say a banker working in the city earning, £100,000, £150,000 gets the same amount of money. I think in terms of other issues around that £10,000 amount, one problem you may see is, so they're talking about allowing people to use that in a certain set of circumstances. So not just £10,000 and you can blow it at the casino or whatever. It's £10,000 to pay off debt, to save in a pension, something that not enough people are doing at the moment, or to buy a first home. Now, if the government did adopt this, and I think it's quite unlikely that they would, but if they did, then one issue you may see is if everyone's been given £10,000 to pay for a home and we don't see any more houses being built, which is one of the big problems in the UK, then what we might see is an inflation in house prices. So people will be getting £10,000 ideally to spend on a home, but the price of the home might go up by £10,000 as well, so it won't necessarily get anyone anywhere.
Do you see any benefits in this proposal and this suggestion in the report at all?
So clearly, if you give people £10,000, certainly if you think about the lack of saving for a pension, so not enough people are saving for old age at the moment. So if you give people a £10,000 leg up to do that, then you get tax relief, so you get a bonus on top of that as well. Then that will potentially start a savings culture in the UK, which is something that we need to happen. Equally, if people use it to pay off debt, so if you've got high-cost debts or if you've got a student loan that's costing you a lot of money, then for those people it might make sense. I think the concern would be if this was adopted and used to help younger people onto the housing ladder, then you may start to push up price and create a bit of a bubble.
Now, the 10,000 was the headline-grabbing element, but many other elements of this report. £2.3 billion NHS levy to be funded by a new national insurance contribution. What do you make of that?
So what they're talking about is taxing the incomes of people who are over state pension age. So at the moment, any earnings, if you're over state pension age, or any pension income over state pension age, doesn't get taxed, and it's not liable for national insurance, which most people think of as a tax anyway. So what they're talking about is levying a certain amount of national insurance on incomes and on pension incomes over that age. Now, again, I think we need to come back to the reality of what can be achieved here. Everyone knows that the grey vote is hugely important in winning general elections. And any politicians looking at this, they may start to grab onto the issue of intergenerational unfairness, but whether they're willing to stand up in a manifesto and say, we're going to tax older people more, I think is open to question.
I think some of them will quibble about there being called the grey vote. They're not all grey. Tom Selby, thank you very much for coming in, sharing your expertise with us.
Millennials, those young adults born between 1981 and 2000, are half as likely as their parents' generation to own their own home by the age of 30. A report by the think tank The Resolution Foundation has proposed ways of bridging that wealth gap, and they include the idea that 25-year-olds should get a £10,000 payment from the state, and that working pensioners should pay more towards the NHS through national insurance payments. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, travelled to Hen Galwyn in North Wales to speak to 3 generations of one family there.
I've lived in this house for 18 years. I bought a house quite young, luckily, thank God I did that.
I've just graduated from uni, I need to pay my student overdraft back.
I've worked in this job with caretaker in the Old Colwyn area for 22 years.
I think I was 21 when we bought this, and I think it was always drummed into me by my tide. He said, if you can, buy a house, because before that we were renting, so it was quite hard to save while you're renting as well. I'm glad I done it, and I think I did it just before the houses went up in price.
Luckily for me, my mum and dad have let me move back home. I don't have to pay rent. I just help with the food shopping now and then. So I'm really fortunate. So yeah, I decided to move home because I knew that's the only possible way I'm going to be able to save for my future.
So when you came to getting a job out of school, what was that like?
When I left school, I worked in a sewing factory. You could just walk into anywhere really and say, is there any jobs going? And they'd say, yeah, you can start next week. But now it's a lot harder, isn't it?
I've been in the same job 21 years. Started there young age. It was easier to get jobs then, and it was more, you stayed in the same job.
Could you imagine that, Jasmine, doing a job for 21 years? Is
No.
that what you want? What you want?
No, I graduated uni in July and I've had three jobs, I think, since, 4 maybe, since then. And now I'll be looking for a new job as well. I think that's the hardest part, trying to get a stable job.
And Sarah, when you think about Jasmine and her generation, have you always thought that your children would be sort of better off in whatever that means?
Yeah, I have actually.
Do you think they will be?
Not sure, because I think time's getting harder.
I'm the first one in my family to go to university, and I think so even my family thought, oh, she'll get a good job, she'll get paid soon as she leaves, and it's just not been the case.
So Lorraine, if you think about young people today, do their lives seem better off than you were?
Like Jasmine's got a car now, and I wouldn't have had a car when I was that age.
Life was simpler then.
Yeah. They like to have things like more holidays and fancy things in the house, like we just had what was given to us.
Well, Lorraine, Sarah and Jasmine face similar challenges to millions of people. Let's take Jasmine. The Resolution Foundation report found people her age are no better off than Sarah's generation. And the most striking illustration of that is home ownership. The generation born just after the Second World War, the baby boomers, enjoyed this high level of home ownership. For the next generation, called Generation X, the figure is a little lower, but still pretty positive. And now, millennials. High house prices and stagnant incomes have meant younger people are now more likely to rent than own a home. Will the government act? Well, with no majority and Brexit to deal with, some might be sceptical. But a final thought. When George Osborne introduced the national living wage in 2015, he thanked one organisation for suggesting the policy to increase the incomes of low-paid people. And that organisation was the Resolution Foundation.
Well, once again, thanks very much, Kamal Ahmed, there for us, our economics editor.